The World of RPGs, Episode 28, France, Part 3. Welcome to The World of RPGs, a podcast in which we travel around the globe and learn about the local role-playing game scenes. I'm your host, Mo Baltz, and in Episode 28, we're going to France. This is the third and final part of a massive episode. I guess you'll be able to follow it without listening to the other parts, since this one is mostly about indie games and French adaptations of The World of Darkness. I have to give a warning here. We had some audio issues in some of the interviews here, so please excuse the quality of some of the recordings. I actually did one interview on Discord, and that was quite surprising because actually Discord is blocked in my location, and it was unblocked for 2 days just when I did the interview. I don't know how that happened. So let's get to that interview. This is with a player and author from one of France's overseas territories.
Hi guys, I'm Yannick, 38, and I discovered TTRPGs when I was about 22. It was with a group of friends from Guadeloupe who introduced me to World of Darkness. It was my very first time on a TTRPG, and we played a campaign that lasts maybe 5 or 6 years. We started it in France, then we continue and finish it on Roll20 after I moved to Canada. And I'm a big lover of game design and design in general. And so I read a lot about game design.
And when you played World of Darkness, did it take place in France or in the US?
Yeah, it took place in Paris, but it was a strange campaign. In that fictional futuristic Paris inspired by Underworld, there was a war between vampires and werewolves. Us, corpos, knew about the existence of the two species, and our main goal was to try to weaponize one to destroy the other one. And when it's done, use that new weapon to sell it to countries, to bring it into modern war, and to put your corporation like the richest corpo on the planet. And we were 4 players. Each player was a corpo. Sometimes we were allied, more often enemies, and I can tell you that we've killed a lot of each other's characters. But it was really fun. It was a great campaign, a great setup, and yeah, we had a lot of fun playing it.
Okay, so you said you're from Guadeloupe, so where is that in France for the listeners?
Yeah, sure. Guadeloupe is an archipelago located in the Lesser Antilles, and broadly speaking, it is the part of the Caribbean that is situated in the north of Venezuela.
Is French the main language spoken there, or are there any local languages?
And yes, French is the official language. I mean, when you go to school, when you introduce yourself, when you go to a shop, offer a service, it will be in French. But when you are partying with friends, or maybe you are around family members, we will speak in Creole, which is our native language.
Have you ever played in Creole or always in standard French?
Although it is one of our native languages, its use is very codified. After the abolition of slavery, French was promoted as the language of civilization, and Creole came to be seen as an obstacle to progress and a relic to slavery. And France is also a multicultural country, built on centuries of assimilation of regions, just like Brittany, Corsica, Basque Country, and more. And the fact is, each of the region having its own culture and language. So, in 1946, under the Third Republic, they decided that the unity of the country must come through speaking French. And this is how French was imposed across the whole country. And at that time, a child who spoke a regional language was punished. And this is how today we got this strange relationship to Creole. I mean, I feel comfortable to play and to discuss Creole with friends and people I'm really close to. But in another way, if I'm playing with strangers, or maybe if I meet someone I do not feel really comfortable with, we will speak French to each other. And the last thing with Creole is that people in Guadeloupe see board games as a child thing, so they are not meant to play a lot. The core of the community is made of people that used to live in France and moved to Guadeloupe and live there. So the majority of them are not Creole speakers, so it doesn't make any sense for them to play in Creole, and this is why we mainly play in French.
You said you played World of Darkness. Have you played any other RPGs since then?
No, not on table. Just the campaign I did with my friends on World of Darkness, and that's it. I used to be a big PC gamer. I did BG1, BG2, Dungeon Siege, Dragon Age, Fable, and there are the big licenses in that time. And today I am really in game design. I listen podcasts about it. I look at the GDC videos on YouTube and also read books all about game design.
But you've worked on your own setting.
Yeah, exactly. And this is why I am so into game design. I'm now working on Biashara, a TTRPG inspired by medieval African cultures. The idea to create a game about Africa came to me during my World of Darkness campaign, but the angle came from discussions with friends. We finally pointed out that when people think about Africa, we mostly think about Egypt, South Africa, and deserts. And the rest, I mean by that, myths, legends, tales, is not really explored by now. So I was like, what do I need to be able to spread my culture, my history, and my beliefs? And the answer was business. And from that perspective, the question now becomes, how can I build strong business partnerships and network? And the answer was simple, a religion. So I made the Yoruba religion a powerful one, powerful enough to reunite every African kingdoms and empires behind a common faith, leading to a third major power around the Mediterranean Sea during Middle Ages. And this is why the game is named Biashara. It's a Swahili word meaning trade, business, entrepreneurship, and it's behind the vision of a sovereign Africa connected to the world and able to shape it based on its military, economy, and religion. And in the game, players will be family members, knowing that families are grouped into clans or tribes, where each members work to strengthen their family's prestige. And that prestige will lead your family into a decision-making position inside of the clan. And then at the city level, then the kingdom level, and then even the empire level. Who knows?
So this is still a work in progress, isn't it? It's not published yet.
Yes, I haven't published anything yet. I'm still working on my starter set. Actually, the system takes me a lot of time because it is a tactical game built around a dice pool system when you always roll against a TN of 4. You start with a pool of d12, and as you take wounds, your entire pool shrinks down to d6 and eventually to d4. I wanted a death spiral system without having the players to calculate any penalties. So this is why you change your type of dice instead of calculate penalties.
So you talked a bit about the setting and the rules. And are there any specific elements which you would think are Afro-Caribbean in the game?
Yes, I incorporate a lot of Afro-Caribbean elements. For example, to reflect that African cultures are mainly oral cultures, players are not allowed to take notes at the table. Or just like Christianity and Islam, the Yoruba religion really branched out. It happened within Africa itself first, but also through the slave trade, which gave birth to the Cuban palo, the Haitian voodoo, or the Brazilian candomblé. So, to make my pantheon, I'm just cherry-picking the deities that interest me the most from all this diversity. Even in the fighting system, my inspiration from Damier, which is a martial art that was born in Martinique, an island close to Guadeloupe. And what is interesting with Damier, it is a complete fighting style, including striking with kicks and punches, throwing, stand-up grappling, and also ground fighting. And of course, there is the bestiary. We have iconic creatures just like zombies and vampire, but with an African twist, which make them very different from the usual Hollywood ones.
This rule with the note-taking sounds really interesting. That's something I'd like to see. So you said you playtested it at conventions.
Yes.
So have you gotten reactions from people with African backgrounds in France?
I'd say most people are quite enthusiastic. But what surprised me the most is the number of people who have some kind of connection to the continent. Can be a friend, a relative, a neighbor, or even having lived there when they were younger. Yeah, I can say I really felt the strong cultural bond that is between people in France and people in Africa. And I'd also say that us, I mean African related people, are the ones who are missing in all of this geek culture. Despite having a strong storytelling tradition and even a strong imagination, this part of our culture is really missing. But it's changing. I am in touch with a designer from Nigeria, and he told me that 2 years ago he created the ABCon convention, which is the first con hosted in Nigeria. We also have Pouspion in Cameroon that stand maybe for the first time 2 years ago too, and it is the first board game convention ever hosted in this country. So yeah, it's still the beginning, but it's taking roots in Africa by now.
I haven't done any African country in my podcast yet, but I'm working on it. I have talked a bit about diasporic African culture in the Brazil episode, of course. Is there something you want to add about Biashara before I ask something else?
If you are curious to know more about this project, you can visit our website at biashara.world, or don't hesitate to follow us on Instagram or Facebook at biashara.ttrpg. Bye-bye!
Now, for the next interview, to really understand it, you might need to know some lore of World of Darkness, especially Vampire the Masquerade, but I guess many listeners would know these games.
Hi, I'm Secrets of the Masquerade, or the person behind the brain, the Secrets of the Masquerade. I began playing tabletop RPGs back in 3,000 years ago in Mexico City, actually. But I'm French and I live in France now. I used to live in Mexico. I used to play tabletop RPGs in Mexico City, where I found out about them existing back when I was in middle school-ish. Yeah, middle school, high school level of studies. So I was like 14 or 15. Back then, tabletop RPGs, card games, and anime and manga conventions were all in the same spaces. So all of it was being part of fandom. So I eventually sat down at the table and see what's going on. And I mostly got into Vampire the Masquerade, which was the big game at the time for girls. So that's how I got in. And I've never stopped since.
And have you tried any other games except Vampire?
I've tried and played a lot of different games, from French small published games such as Patient 13, which means patient number 13, all the way to Dungeons and Dragons 5th edition. A lot of White Wolf games from that time, a lot of recent White Wolf games published by Onyx Path, Call of Cthulhu, other French publications such as Cats the Masquerade, In Nomine Satanis Magna Veritas, which is also a French publication, and various French and English, British, or American editions of different games. For instance, the Call of Cthulhu games, I play them in French with the French edition. Dungeons and Dragons, I have both. Vampire the Masquerade, I have 3 different editions in 3 different languages, French, Spanish, and English. Also, small indie publications, mostly from the Far Horizon Co-op and auto-published stuff from each. So there's a lot of variety in terms of what I play at.
Let's get back to Vampire the Masquerade. So when you started in Mexico, did you play in Mexico? I mean, the adventures, were they set in Mexico or in the US?
Half and half. Some of them were played in Mexico City with one of the campaign books, which takes place in Mexico City itself. But most of the time it was either in Europe, in the Middle Ages, Western Europe. Like I think there was one game that was in Vienna. Not that many campaigns that I played were in the US because I already read the campaign, so I could not play the campaign because I already knew the secrets of Ravenloft. So it was not really interesting. And sometimes the occasional one shot was like in random Western city that is very average and can be in any country. It doesn't really change anything because it did not necessarily need any cultural flavors for it to work. It was just a one shot. So like random stuff, it was fine. But yeah, when I began playing as a storyteller, so the Dungeon Master storyteller for Vampire the Masquerade, I actually set my games in France. So it's the country I know most, being French.
Then let's go to that topic. So one of the reasons I started the podcast was to find out about the localization and the local versions of the game. So for Vampire the Masquerade, are there any official or unofficial supplements from France that are not available in English?
Officially, well, it depends on what you call official, because there's a whole debate about whether it was okay or not. But back in the wee days of like 1993, there's a French book that came out, which is called The World of Darkness France, which covers some French elements linked to the World of Darkness. So there's a chapter for mage, there's a chapter for werewolf, there's a chapter for vampire, there's a chapter, I think there's like half a chapter for wraiths or proto-wraith, because at the time I don't think wraith even came out. This book is famous or infamous because it has a naked lady on the cover. And whether White Wolf actually allowed this book to be published or the permission was sought but not given, I think it was lost to time. And this book is still findable in second-hand store. If you look carefully, you can find it for about 20 euros, which is more or less MSRP price. And it covers first or second edition of the World of Darkness book. So this was before revised. So that this is why I mean it's an old book. And nowadays, we have a jump in time for like 5,000 years later. The new French publisher who has the license for Vampire the Masquerade, whose name is Arcane Asylum, for Vampire the Masquerade 5th edition, did come out with French exclusive books for the V20, so 20th anniversary edition, as well as 5th edition. And those books are very good, actually. They're very interesting. They're very beautiful. They hired very interesting artists, and they did a lot of research in terms of history and local culture to represent key aspect of French history for the campaign, such as the Qatari heresy. Those are very good publications, and many English speakers are very sad that it does not exist in English. So whenever Paradox wants to publish them in English, they should do it. And there's a few unofficial books, both in French and in English, on the Storyteller's Vault. And this is where I started writing myself as a self-published author. So this is where I publish my own version of my Cities by Night book in various editions and in various languages.
That would be my next question. So on your website, Secrets of the Masquerade, you also have an overview of French and English supplements you wrote for Storyteller's Vault, so these kind of semi-official books. Can you give an overview of these?
Yes, of course. Well, Secrets of the Masquerade, it started as a blog where I would actually explain random facts and tidbits about how to play certain clans or how to consider playing and creating a campaign. My motto was, clans don't embrace people, people embrace people. So you have to think of your character as an individual and not as a member of a given clan. So you're you first, and for whatever reason, someone from clan X chose you to become their child. And this is why you are part of this clan. It's not like, oh yeah, I'm making a Ventru. No, you're not making a Ventru. You're making someone who is a ruthless financial tycoon who was noticed by an old noble person who has no idea how the stock market works and decided to embrace you because they needed to keep up with the money and how to manage their money in this new era. More like that. And this person happens to be Ventru. This is why you are being a Ventru. And once I did that, the Storyteller's Vault, which is a platform on DriveThruRPG where people can publish and monetize their content for World of Darkness IPs, they opened to Vampire the Masquerade and World of Darkness like a few years after my blog opened. So I decided, hey, why not compile stuff into proper game supplements with a cute layout and everything? And that's why I put them there. I usually write directly in English for a bunch of stylistic reasons. It's easier for me to write in English than to write in French. The reason being spoken French and written French are very different languages. And I don't like how French is written in general in terms of levels of politeness. We're going to say it like this. I'm far too casual to be writing a game supplement in French. It would be considered too familiar to publish a book in French for me. And because I was already translating one of my friends' campaign and adapting it to my city, because Bordeaux by Night, which is the book I wrote, my flagship masterpiece of publication is Bordeaux by Night. Originally, the setting is from a LARP game I played, and this LARP game was in Liège, Belgium. And Liège and Bordeaux actually have a lot of socioeconomic similarities, as well as historical similarities to Bordeaux. So because of that, I decided maybe the setting can be transposed to Bordeaux, and with a few adjustments, mostly for historical figures. It actually works pretty well because it has a river in the middle. The population, in terms of amount of population and socioeconomics and universities, is more or less the same. The religion is the same, and certain relations to the crown of France when France was still a monarchy, it has some similarities. Some of the urban legends are very similar because people are not very imaginative. So, like, a lady dressed in white warns you about the death of something. It's like the Reaper. There's a local story about the Reaper in any city or any region you go to. It just has a different flavor. So I fully adapted, translated LARP setting into a proper book supplement for Bordeaux, with permission, of course, because I didn't do it without permission from the original author. Got some art made, also with permission to put it in a commercial authorization to use the artworks. And off I went. And it seems that I story told this campaign on a forum play by post like 3,000 years ago too. I also story told it on Twitch like 3,000 years ago. And other people have actually played the campaign differently. The campaign for the book supplement for my city. I think it's a quite niche thing and people seem to like it. So I'm very happy with the research I did. I had to write like a whole chapter about how to be French, what makes it different from American cities. Like in Bordeaux, you can walk and you should walk anywhere because the city is very small. So in big parking lots, we don't have that. People who say, oh yeah, no, you shouldn't buy this house. This house is old and maybe someone died in it. Yeah, I mean, this is the norm. Like, if someone didn't die in the house where your house is over 200 years old, it would be weird if nobody had ever died in it. Also, why are vineyards important? What's the climate like? What's the academic year like? Why are people always on holidays? How do you strike? How do you strike, fellow kids? Where and how you go to buy your bread? And why you go to buy your bread every day? What times do things open? What times do things close? Because this is very important in France. Is when plenty of stuff is already closed by the time people wake up, because vampires are only alive during the night. Something as simple as the fact that Bordeaux itself, even if it's south of France, is actually very up north in terms of latitude and longitude. In this case, latitude. So during the summer, you have 15 to 16 hours of daytime. So vampire activity is very low because you wake up and it's like almost 11 p.m. and then you have to go to bed because it's already 4 a.m. So what are you going to do in like this? And for Americans, this is very surprising because they don't consider that there's so much variety during the winter and during the summer. But I have to tell them, Bordeaux is at the same latitude as Montreal. And Montreal is pretty up north. So yeah, writing a whole section to explain this to English speakers and mostly Americans, because Brits are okay, Brits they get it, but Americans they usually don't. They consider that southern France or Spain or Italy are actually, they think it's much more south than it actually is in terms of daytime and nighttime. So I really wanted to make sure that potential readers would have everything in hand to make it the most believable and the most down to earth possible. But yeah, I mean, if they want to play superheroes with fans, it's perfectly fine. Like, I really wanted to give all the tools, and if you don't use any tool, that's fine. You do you.
I visited Bordeaux in the summer of 2023, and I think I never took a car there. From the airport, I took the tram, and then I would walk or take the tram, even though I had an injured foot. And the funniest thing for me was the names of some tram stations, because you have like Stalingrad as a tram station. And that is so weird for me. But I think it was just battles in which either France or France's allies won or something. I don't know.
Usually they name the tram stations or the bus stations, they're all named after the places that are in the city. And Stalingrad in particular is the name of the plaza where the tram stops is at. Mostly for cities that are a bit old, but also cities which have kind of a big population. Many streets and plazas and public places are named to give homage to either a person or an event, a historical event, mostly linked to World War II. And Stalingrad is obviously a World War II homage reference because, we were allies with the Russians at the time. And as a way to honor their fighting against the Nazis, especially because Bordeaux was occupied by the Nazis and was part of the occupied territory and was used as a military basis by the Nazis. This was a way to clean themselves, let's say like that. There's a few cities and plazas that are renamed every now and then. Some of them were named after the monarchy, and then they got changed with the names related to the Republic because of the French Revolution. If you go on Google Maps and travel any random city in France, you will find a school that's named Jules Ferry, which is a guy who basically made school mandatory for children. You will find a plaza named after Napoleon. You will find, maybe you will find a bunch of streets or plazas named after local resistants who were either killed by the Nazis or were deported. Yeah, it's a part of how we keep our cities alive and our memory alive, which is very good for Wraith. If you play Wraith, the fact that many streets are renamed, or plazas are named, or corners are named, or trees are named after the deceased or in memory of. When you go into the tabletop RPGs and you play Wraith, you realize that it is a very good tool to fully explain and fully abuse these mechanics.
Yeah, that is also in the German version of Berlin by Night. They practically rewrote the book because the historical references were so bad in the original version, in the first edition vampire book. Like they made literal main Nazis as vampires. And it was just too ridiculous for a German audience. And so they completely rewrote that for the German version.
It sounds like a need to learn German. I remember the Berlin by Night. I found it hilarious. I'm not a history specialist, but even I found it kind of cringy. I mean, not just ending up being vampires is fine, but it depends on how you make it endorsable. If you make it endorsable in something good, that's not good. I have some bad people in my settings, actual awful people, but they're portrayed to be as a bad thing. And this is the Birth of a Nation versus American History X debate. Both represent the same thing, but one of them has a very different message than the other. Specifically for Vampire the Masquerade, representing bad things and having bad people in the story is fine as long as you as a storyteller and you as a writer fully commit to I represent these characters as being bad people, antagonists, and not something you should glorify or something you should aspire to have or to be. So proceed with caution, because if you have a full cast of blood-drinking monsters who control the world secretly, and they all happen to be LGBT+, it kind of conveys the opposite of inclusivity and diversity that you really want to do. So you have to be very careful. Specifically for Bordeaux by Night, with the original setting, the setting is incredibly white, despite the city not being that white. But the thing is, the diversity at the time was different. But there's also the fact that because they are a socioeconomic group of people who are very rich and very powerful, who choose people who look like them to join their circles, this is a whole message on its own. There's a whole social reproduction situation. And because of that, they don't pay attention to the different minorities and the different moving, alive structures of the living city. And this is why they're failing. They're completely ignoring the former immigrant population. Like we're talking third or fourth generation immigrants. So they're very, very much French. They're very much local. They're very much part of the city. But because the local vampire elites completely ignore them because it's whatever, like they're Arabs, they're black. What do we care about them? Like, because they do that, this proves that they're in the wrong. And this is why some of those neighborhoods are completely ignored, and they're also free from vampire interference because vampires don't care about them. So it is a deliberate choice in my case that my cast is not very diverse in terms of vampires, and especially vampires in power. But it's meant to be shown as a problem. And it's meant to show that at some point, these power elites are inbred. And because they're inbred, they're losing a lot of opportunities and they completely miss and they're completely disconnected from the city. They're kind of in between inverted commas, they're kind of ruling, but they're not. For me, this was particularly important. First, because I didn't want to be offensive and write characters who are a part of the minorities that I am not a part of myself. But also because I wanted players to be able to be the protagonist and be part of those minorities and go up yours to the society of vampires, which is stuck into the very old ways.
Maybe we can also talk about some of your other work. So in English, I see here a book called Ladies of Darkness.
Yes, that's one of my most recent ones. My most recent. Damn, how are these Ladies of Darkness? I think it's like from 2022, something like that. So Ladies of Darkness, actually, I wrote it with an Italian artist. My goal there was to create player characters. Those player characters, they were meant to be more diverse and more open-minded than the regular NPCs you can find in any given book. Specifically, that book, I also wrote it without any system in mind. They can be women for Call of Cthulhu. They don't have any game system in it originally. I mean, you can add game systems to them, but when I wrote it with Vampire the Masquerade in mind and in general World of Darkness in mind. But I think I put out a version of this book that is very neutral in terms of these are characters that you can use in any setting. It is an urban modern setting. I think you can use it in Marvel. Just add the powers for Marvel Cinematic Universe or Marvel games. You can use it for any zombie game. They're more like character concepts and character motivations as well as character tropes than actual characters for any given game. The Vampire Masquerade version of these books, the character tropes based on whether they're physical, social, or mental ladies, because those are the three categories of specialties for World of Darkness characters. I remember I did put them out as just Chronicles of Darkness, World of Darkness, general ways, but I did put these three books out as not necessarily World of Darkness focused books.
Any other things you wrote you want to point out?
I think the favorite book that I wrote that I believe people would make good use of is a guide to storytelling and guide to playing. And those are the guide to playable characters and guide to storytelling, which are a clean version of what's on my blog. The guide to storytelling is how to create your own campaign for World of Darkness. It's more like a conceptual book in the sense of, okay, this is the mindset you have to create your setting in a way that you can drop your players in them and the players are going to break everything. And it's the consequences of your players' action that are going to work out. Because the players are the ones who are the protagonists. And that's what's important to notice. And the guide to playable characters means the guide that I created for players, so that they're able to create characters that have agency and have motivations that work in a game. Because if you're going to play your broody type that doesn't like people and does their thing on their own and have their own concepts, like it's fine, but in a campaign, it's not really fun. Like, give your characters motivation to work with other characters. It's not like my character wouldn't do that. At least give the storyteller something that they can call upon so your character becomes involved and gets into this mess. Because, most characters would not get involved. But they're the protagonist, and because they're the protagonist, they have to be part of the story somehow. It's up to you as a player to create a character that is part of the story.
So you said you usually write your stuff in English, and you have the books in French and in English, or sometimes even in Spanish. Have you noticed any weird parts or things that are difficult to translate, especially for Vampire, but maybe also some other games between the languages?
Aside from the obvious question of lexicon, which is like, how do you even translate kindred? Like, how? What do you do with that? There's a whole lot of more than vocabulary situation, more like levels of politeness. Because in English, you just have a you, and it's common to use people's first names. In French, historically, it's more complicated. You have the formal polite you singular, the formal polite vous plural. It's the same word, it's vous. And in general, you would talk to people, especially in terms of high positions of power, you would use their last names. Even with a title, like you would say, like Prince last name. In my case, in Bordeaux by Night, most people don't even know the first name of the prince. So it's not even public knowledge. But how do you even translate that properly? And there's a lot of nuance that you would lose. Like, would you call your sire with the polite form? It gets weird because there's a certain level of intimacy and proximity usually with your sire. So, like, you would go with the tu, the informal way of speaking to someone. How do you truly translate that? It gets a bit curious. If you play in English, it doesn't really matter. But in some cases, when I wrote the book, I was like, thankfully, I don't have to think about it because I'm writing in English. But when I had to put out the book in French, I was like, damn, I will have to not write the characters' pronouns, but how would the NPC address PCs? Some of them would not give a shit, I must say. Like, you are a random impolite form. Would they get angry if they got addressed the same way, like with the impolite, informal tu? Who knows? Some of them might be okay with it, some of them might not. And because some of them really look old and some of them really look young, it creates a cognitive dissonance that's very interesting to think about. But I don't have the bandwidth to write a whole supplement about whether characters who look like they're 13 would prefer to be called like with very formal vous instead of the informal tu, which is the one you would use for children. Except that's not a child, that's a 1,000-year-old vampire, So like it gets weird. It gets very weird. In terms of official publications, in general, the translation, especially the most recent ones, they work in terms of localization, but one-to-one, they don't really work. So if you only play in French and you only have the French books, they're fine. There's no big inconsistency between different books. And the writers who wrote the French version did a good job. For the Spanish edition, that's a whole other subject because it was translated in Spain. So because I lived in Mexico, there's a lot of, but that's not how we speak Spanish. It's Latin American Spanish versus Spain Spanish. The Spanish editor is actually in Spain. There's some fights going on there, which I find fascinating. I really like watching about that. It's also the case for other media, like for TVs and anime and stuff like that. I really like watching how they do it differently. But for RPGs in general, French versions are okay. There's like sometimes a random error that slips by, especially in older books. But usually they get solved in a next supplement. Like there's a 1,000-year-old anecdote, like back when Changeling was published in French. And one of the books talked about a fire, but they translated like a prairie fire. I was like, that doesn't make any sense. In the next book, they say, oh no, it's actually a bonfire. So they mistranslated bonfire into something that is not a bonfire, but it's still a fire, but it's not a bonfire. So it made no sense in terms of what the changelings were doing. Like, are they setting fire to the whole forest? No, they're just having a party with a bonfire. But nowadays it's fine. It's maybe a bit too one-to-one with the English versions. If the original books are in English, they tend to be more safe and more neutral. Those new books tend to lose the particularities of the French language or the particularities of talking to a French reader. I'm a partisan that in a tabletop book, it would be better to talk to the reader with an informal way of speaking. because we're part of the same group of people. We're part of the same fandom. We're part of the same world. We're part of the same associations. And it's customary in France that if you're part of one association and you're like pals doing hobbies together, you use the informal way of speaking. So having the formal way of speaking feels very weird. That's a meeting. It's not a French thing.
In German, it's the same with the formal, informal. And then if I go to a game shop anywhere in Germany, I would use informal. Like I would address other gamers informally. But there's some game books that use formal language towards the players, and it's really weird for me. Okay, I'm out of questions, and we've talked for almost 40 minutes. Is there anything you want to add?
The French player base tend to be older than many other countries because we've had RPGs and physical bookstores with RPGs for a long time. In my city, it is Descartes, which is the name of a popular game shop, which also sells tabletop board games. In Paris, there's quite a lot of game places as well in various different neighborhoods of the city. One of them is also named Descartes, but they're not related at all. They used to be related like 3,000 years ago, but they're not linked anymore. They're different. And these are mostly near the universities and near where people would gather to play card games too. So it's still modernly used as such. The French city RPG scene is very big. We have a lot of small editors. We had a lot of translations. Nowadays it's a bit different, but some of the editors sadly had to shut down. I say editors, but I mean publishers, by the way.
Yeah, that might be a language thing.
They do edit too, but no, they're the French publishers. And there's still a strong associative network. If anyone comes to France and they want to do some tabletop or LARPing, we do LARPing too. Hop into any random Discord server or game shop place. We'll have a lot of flyers about different associations that offer initiations or come hang out with us. And it's usually because they're associations, they're non-profit. They're really doing it for the love of the game. And I believe that's something that's getting lost with the way that we try to turn all hobbies into a monetized hustle. And so any hobby you have to monetize, because if you don't, you're wasting your time, basically. The books I publish, some of them are free, some of them are paid. But I've not increased any prices ever since publication. Most of the content is also free on my blog, so it's like fine if people are on my website. There's also free community copies, so I try to give back to the community whenever they can. So if anyone really wants to read any of my books, but they cannot afford them for whatever reason, I'm happy to give a discounted or a free copy if they just shoot me an email. So please just rate and review and share the link if you do. But otherwise, this is pure hobby situation. I'm really happy about the French way of doing things with associations and nonprofits.
And finally, an indie author I discovered when I supported the crowdfunding of the English translation of one of his games. One side note, he later mentions Christophe Guillaume Beuclair in the talk, and he is actually from Switzerland.
My name is Thomas Munier. I am a French TTRPG author, and I also make a little bit of game theory. I was introduced to TTRPG when I was 10. I discovered HeroQuest Dungeon Crawler. I played Dungeon Crawlers during 10 years, something like that, maybe 8 years. Once I was 18, I started real TTRPG like Call of Cthulhu. And after that, I discovered many traditional TTRPGs. And during the beginning of 2K10, I discovered story games, game theory from the Forge. In France and in a French-speaking area, we had forums inspired from the Forge. There used to be a forum called Silent Drift, which was moderated by Christophe Guillaume Beuclair, which wrote a very great horror TTRPG called Unspeakable. This is a cosmic horror TTRPG, very inspired from the Forge game theory. This was a forum we have a great time chatting about story games and GMless, other shared narration TTRPGs. And it helps me to coin a new way to think my practices and my vision of game design. And so later in the 10s, I produce a lot of TTRPGs, story games, LARPs, and other weird forms of narrative game playing. And so I'm not only on the Forge vibe today. We try to produce our own fashion of games. I try to pay interest to play design. Play design, this is the way that we design the play during the game. So this is complementary with game design. This is just a smart term to call about calibration. I try to pay interest to the practice and not just pay interest only to game design. System as a social matter and something that is time to time resynchronized, renegotiated, minute by minute during the play. This is far more a question of person than a question of games.
Okay, we're now already deep into the game theory part. Maybe we get one step back to the more concrete, and that is games. We can come back to the theory later. So you have a blog that is mostly in French, but also in English. And that includes your theory texts and also games, doesn't it? Yes.
There is a part of a blog in English, so you can find all my contents that is in English. Could be, an easy introduction to non-French speaking people. The blog has many contents, something like 50 games. You also can find 200 game design articles, something like 100 articles about creativity. I try to draw a personal vision about creativity, including role-playing practice, but also all kinds of creativity, just like life hacking, painting, art, and all part of that includes of kind of self-expression and creativity. And so I speak about the inner struggle that you can have when you try to deal with your ideas, your projects, your desire, and try to find an equilibrium between the different parts of life, family, art, work.
The blog is called Outsider Art, and I also put a link in the show notes, of course. And I wanted to talk about a couple of the games. On the one hand, the ones that are also available in English, but especially also the ones which are not, because that's one of the reasons for the podcast, to learn about games that are not available in English. So I just mentioned a couple of ones that stood out to me, and maybe you can say something about them. The first one I just have to ask, because recently there was a crowdfunding for the English translation called Dragonfly Motel. Can you say something about that game?
This is a TTRPG with Han Eric and Lin Xian, surreal vibe. You play wanderers that have a step of a life in a motel called Dragonfly Motel. And all the games that you play will begin at the Dragonfly Motel, which is not described in the game. You have to picture it from your imagination. This is a game about dreams and poetry. So you will play something like very strange, very weird fiction. I will say that the main particularity of Dragonfly Motel is that there is no need for coherence. So if your character dies in a scene, there can be alive just the scene later. You can discard anything that has been said in the former scenes. And so you can have a very oniric result. And we can try some different things like framing a scene in different fashions. You can repeat the same scene in different fashions and reiterate. And so the result is very poetic, very strange. You can't remember the fiction because this is very uncoherent and weird, but you remember the vibe. And sometimes this is a very important game, I think, for self-expression, because you can manage to express some things that you feel deep inside. You can express them with a surreal fashion that authorizes you to express yourself. This kind of filter is very useful when you have some inner picture to sort out and you don't have to face the judgment of others because this is just a dream. And so it reinforces what you call alibi in the LARP game theory.
And I noticed the English version is published by a Swedish publisher, isn't it? Was there a particular reason for that?
I think there's a pipeline between Nordic gaming and French gaming for different reasons. In a way, many French LARP game designers paid interest to Nordic LARP and so make some cultural exchanges, made trips to Nordic lands to study Nordic LARP. And so there is a big cultural influence from Nordic LARP to French LARP, but I hope that we also try to give to Nordic LARPers some hints of what we do in France. And in a more micro way, there is a guy in Sweden called Simon Petersen, which is a French-speaking person. And so he paid interest to indie French TTRPGs and indie French game theory. So he introduces French TTRPGs to his Sweden pals. And so I think this is in that manner that Lucas Falk from Blackfist Publishing, he had discovered Dragonfly Motel thanks to Simon Petersen, which made a great work introducing French indie TTRPG gems to Sweden.
Would you say there's anything particular to French indie RPGs?
Yeah, I would say there is a real TTRPG French connection. In France, we started creating TTRPG since the beginning of the 80s. There is a lot of indigenous creation in France and in French-speaking countries in general. We also made a great work of creating our own game theory, thanks to forums like Silent Drift, bloggers like Frédéric Sintès, who used to be a very important person for French indie game design. He started making analysis of the Forge game design approach, but later he developed his own ways to think the media. I think his articles and his games were very inspiring to the whole French indie game design, and a lot of us started to make our own experiences and our experiments and our own game design theories, which is my case.
Okay, since you already mentioned it now, your own theory, do you have material on that in English on your blog, or is that in French?
I don't have any English articles, but we made a podcast called Voulez-vous roleplay avec moi, where we are speaking about game theory. For instance, we made 3 episodes called Inclusive Design, which is an approach of my own. We have 3 episodes chatting with Julien Pouard, which is another French game designer, and we were chatting with Ron Edwards.
Ron Edwards of The Forge.
Yes, exactly.
Now, concerning other games you wrote, I have a question about 1 or 2 more of them, and let's see if I can pronounce them. Marin de Bretagne. I'm interested in that one because it has this local feature, Bretagne as a region in France.
Marin de Bretagne. This is a tiny game. When we play, we invent our own legends inspired from Brittany folklore. So yes, Brittany is in the west coast of France, close to England. So Brittany has a shared past and culture with England. For instance, you have La Matière de Bretagne. All the King Arthur's myths takes place both in England, Scotland, Wales, and also Brittany, because that was the same cultural part in the Middle Age. And so Brittany has a very strong and specific culture. And I tried to make a game that coined that. This is a game written in 2 languages, French and the Brittany language.
So that's a Celtic language related to Welsh and Scottish?
Yes, exactly.
Are there any people in France playing in that language?
I'm not sure because there is not so much people talking the Brittany language. Even there is some kind of revival today, but Brittany-speaking people are still very seldom. But I had one day an experiment playing this game with Brittany-speaking persons. That was very enriching. Unfortunately, I didn't understood anything of the game because I'm not a Brittany.
But are you from that region?
No, I was born in Lorraine, which is at the east of France, but I'm living in Brittany for 25 years.
And then I'm checking on itch.io, and there are like 30 or 40 games, and many of them, including some of the English ones, reference something called Milvaux.
Milvaux or Miles Vale in English.
So there seems to be some connection. Can you say something about that? I didn't quite catch what it is about.
This is a setting that I developed for 20 years. This is a post-apocalyptic forest setting. So this is in a blurry future and the world is in ruins and the forest has taken over the place. So we live in the wild. This is kind of a folk horror setting with many monsters from the folklore, because the monsters and all supernatural events and phenomena are coming from the egregor, that is a production of our thoughts or our beliefs and our fears, all the collective subconscious frame of people. And oblivion and memory is a very important topic in this universe. You play amnesic people, and there is a kind of oblivion disease that is an important part of the people that live in. And I took the option of not building a single game in this universe, but building many, many games in order to frame different atmospheres, different vibes. But also many of my Miles Vale games can be clipped together. So you can have your own Lego, your own construct that fits with your game desires. You can have speed gaming with games like Orient, that is descended from the Queen game when you follow a guide in the forest. So this is a very speed gaming approach. But you can also find games that plunge into the deep lore, like Influenza. Influenza is a game that I am very proud of. You can find it in English. And this is a game of heroism, martyrdom, and decadence in the forest hell of Miles Vale. You play bigger than life people, also in a horror epic vibe. This is a game with a lot of poetry because you can kill somebody with a word, you can die from love, you can be hurted by a rose or something like that. Everything is possible in this game. And you also can have a very badass fights and shonen punchlines. This is also a game for that.
So thank you for listening to episode 28 of The World of RPGs. The intro music was Battle of the Dragons by Thomas Mutziu, and the logo is by Iber Karakash. A special thanks goes out to all my interviewees from France that helped bring this episode together. I also want to thank Callum from Belgium, who helped me with contacts to some indie authors. And as always, you can find relevant links in the show notes. As for recommendations, you can find another interview with Mathieu from Rollis TV on the YouTube channel Polishing RPGs. And there's also an interview with Secrets of the Masquerade on the channel Café Rollist, which is run by Callum, who I just mentioned. And if you're wondering where to find the show notes of this podcast, they're on the landing page of the hosting site Let's Cast FM. So if you Google the World of RPGs plus the term RSS as an RSS feed, it should come up. I guess I could also feed those into Spotify, but I'm not quite sure how that works, and it's kind of extra work. Please follow and like this podcast on your player of choice or the social media you follow. For the next episode, it was a bit tricky to find the right actual play because there are 3 official languages in the country, and we have already covered the countries in which those 3 languages are majority languages. So I first had to find out if there actually is a channel from that specific country. I mean, there's a reason the next episode is placed right after the Netherlands and France. But the interesting thing is the following game of Dungeons and Dragons is actually played in a regional dialect.
En Balthazar roept, laat maar zien dat je je teamleden goed kent, hè? En laat zien dat je goed kan samenwerken. En nu knipoogt hij niet. Ik wil van iedereen initiative. Ik wil niet hebben dat je je character sheets doorgeeft aan elkaar. Okay. Nee, geen character sheets doorgeven. Je zit jezelf, maar je zit wel met abilities en dingen van andere mensen bezig. Mooi. En de hoop dat je er in de 2 jaar en half dat je samen aan het spelen zit, toch al een beetje basiskennis hebt over wat dat iedereen kan doen. Maar je zit ook wel in staat van dingen naar elkaar te roepen tijdens het gevecht.
Eén ding wel. En Jennifer hebben wij wel nog niet zoveel gezien. Nee, maar dat is nu even
Ja,
wel
maar
echt...
verstand. Ja,
Ben
maar
maar-
goed.
Ik weet begot niet wat dat art
Maar het is
de vissers
zo-
doen.
Wacht, het is zo doorschuiven. Ja. Oké, maar
Dus
dat is
Waarom was?
ander.
Ik weet meer over Leonide bijvoorbeeld.
Ja,
Allee,
Omdat we...
verstand.
Ja.
Ja, maar dat is nu...
Dus, ja, oké.
Rest zwart of helemaal?
Maar wacht, en moeten we een HP-ding bijhouden van
Allebei.
de persoon?
Ja, dat is het. Hè. Dus inderdaad van de persoon van wie dat komt. Dus
Maar de stats...
waarschijnlijk, misschien is het toch wel makkelijker dat je hun character sheets doet.
Ja, dat lijkt me ook
Maar
wel.
ik wilde dat niet doen in het geval dat mensen dat ding hebben geschreven en dan anderen niet mogen lezen.
Nee,
Had ik mijn
oh.
geheim nog niet gedeeld, dan ging ik dat niet gewoon hebben, inderdaad.
Dus dat iedereen dat oké vindt, mag je van mij wel character sheets
Ja,
doorgeven.
dat
Moet je
me...
spel zoeken?
Ik weet niet dat je...
Ja, dat mag.
Maar het lijkt me nog altijd het
Het is wel een beetje
makkelijkste...
chaotisch.
Dat
Ja,
heb ik
maar
al
het
zo
spel
dat-
kan kop, maar staat niet op.
Oké.
Staat op.
Ik heb wat dingetjes bijgeschreven.
Het lijkt me wel nog altijd logisch en
allemaal.
gemakkelijker
Ah, ja.
dat je aanbevelingen roept naar elkaar en elkaar helpt. En dat,
Dat kreeg je niet
ja,
allemaal.
dat lijkt me wel nog
Kan
tof.
nog opschrijven. hè.
Wel cool.
Dus dat is de naam spel en dat zijn de Warlock spells.
D20,
En-
initiative check.
Een hele belangrijke.
Ja, dat weet ik. En is dat...
Oh, kut!
Ik
Dit
ben
gaat
nu
zo goed
de
lopen.
groene magie.
Ik
Dat
zie
wil
niet de
zeggen
groene magie.
dat ik alles wat blauw...
Oei, groen en blauw zit raar in
Nee,
het
hoe
zesde.
20.
Ja,
Fuck.
oké.
Rollies.
En dat zijn de dingen die ik vaak... Allee, gebruik,
19.
die staan hier, maar ik
Oh, nee.
Ja.
Maar ik heb...
De geest van Laurens en Meijang.
Ik ga u...
Voilà. Je zit even in het lichaam van Barbara, dus met een 20.
Voilà.
Oké. 20 of meer. Ja. Je wel vulfoon achteraf.
Oh! Natural 20.
Ook?
Hier
Wat
ook?
zal is dat hier?
Meen je het?
Echt.
Wij ook? Ah, dan moet je
Ja,
rollies
sorry,
doen.
ik was nog papier
Ja,
naar
maar
Roderick
rollie-
aan het
De
geven.
rollies, ja, dat is nog geldig. hè.
Wacht, hè, Roderick.
Ik had Natural 20 mee, maar ik moest een rollie doen.
Ah, cool.
Dus mijn rollie was niet.